Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Tzadi Daled begins and ends with a discussion of Korban Pesach and how far is called B'derech Rechoka, too far away. The vast majority of the Daf between those two discussions is devoted to astronomical phenomena and the size of the universe. So the first discussion is when we say that a person is too far, so we define that as being as far as Modi'in, which we said was 15 mil. So the Gemara wants to know, is that a length of time or is that a length of distance? What if somebody's closer but it takes just as long to get to Yerushalayim, or if somebody is further but can get there in the same amount of time? How is that considered? Is it about travel time or is it about the actual length of space? And the Gemara answers, the Gemara says it's about the distance that you are. How do we know that? Because the Torah defines it, and he says that the Torah says you're chayiv in a korban if you're b'derech lo hoya, if you weren't on the road. If you were physically on the road, if you were physically in a place that's too distant, then you're not chayiv in the korban, even if you could get there faster. So let's say, for example, you're outside of Modi'in, which we said is too far, but you have a super fast horse, so you could get there faster. Doesn't matter, you're still considered not b'derech lo hoya, you are b'derech, you're far enough away. Now let's say somebody's within the length of land, he's within Modi'in to Yerushalayim, so he is close enough to get there, but he's traveling with his family, he has a lot of wagons and camels and all kinds of slow things, so he can't get there fast enough. So the Gemara says, no, it does not go by how long it takes you to get there, it goes by how far you are, and this guy's not far enough. Rashi explains he's not an onus because he could easily get off, leave the rest of the family, and run quickly to get to Yerushalayim. Now the Gemara launches into a lengthy discussion about the length of the universe, the size and the length of the universe. Then it enters some other astronomical phenomena. The Gemara is going to involve in this a discussion of length, which we had in the end of the last daf, concerning the distance from Modi'in to Yerushalayim and similar measurements and how we derive those lengths. So the Gemara first says as follows. Rava says two statements about the size of the universe. First of all, he says the semicircle that the sun traverses from sunrise to sunset, that is, the half circle, the path that it takes from horizon to horizon, that is 6,000 parsa, and the thickness of the atmosphere, meaning the height that the sun is above, is 1,000 parsa. Where does he get these measurements from? So the Gemara says the 6,000 parsa measure that he learned from his Rebbe. The 1,000 amas he figured out from Svara, based on a Gemara which we've seen earlier. We quoted earlier that Rabbi Bar Bachana quoted Rav Yechanan that said that the average walking distance that a person can walk in one day is 10 parsa, which is 40 mil. Now, that count works as follows. That is from earliest dawn, first light, to last light, from the dawn till Tzesak HaChavim. Now, the space from first light until sunrise takes up 5 mil. The space from sunset until the light completely disappears takes 5 mil. That leaves 30 mil from sunrise until sunset. And that's where the sun is traversing those 6,000 parsa. And those 30 mil, that is 6 times as much as it takes for the sun to move from zero light to sunrise. Now, the time that it takes the sun to go from zero light to sunrise, it is traversing that thickness. That is equal to the thickness, to the length that the sun is above the earth, far from the earth. So you see that space, that length, the height of the sun, the thickness of the atmosphere, I should say, is 1/6 of the length of the semicircle the sun has to make from horizon to horizon. Now, we said that semicircle, Rava learned from his Rebbe, is 6,000 parsa. That means that the height of the atmosphere, which is how long it takes for it from the dawn till it fully rises, that is 1,000. That is 1/6 of that, right? Because that is 5 mil, which is 1/6 of the 30 mil, which is the length that's left for a person to walk during the sunrise to sunset. Okay, now Having established that, the Gemara is going to ask a large number of kashas on these statements of Rava, and the Gemara is going to roundly and solidly reject it based on all these things which we are about to see. So the Gemara's first kasha is from a brayso that quotes Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda very clearly says otherwise. He says that the thickness of the sky, meaning the height of the atmosphere from the ground, is 1/10 of the walking space of the day. Now, Rav had said that it's 1/6. Rabbi Yehuda the Tana says that it's 1/10. And he says, I'm going to prove it to you as follows. And he says that the average distance a person can walk in one day is 10 parsa, which is 40 mil, like Rabbi Yochanan said, quoted by Rabbi Bar Chana. But here he says that the space from first light to sunrise and from sunset to the disappearance of the light, that's not 5 mil, that's actually 4 mil. That's 4 mil. That 4 mil, therefore, is 1/10 of the 40 mil that it takes the sun to traverse the entire horizon to horizon. Now, he's counting from first light to last light, so his 40 mil is not contradictory to the 30 mil that we said earlier from sunrise to sunset. That's not a problem. The problem is that he said that it's that the period from first light to sunrise is 4 mil, and earlier we had seen that Rava is understanding that it's 5 mil. Now, Rava didn't say that on his own. Rava quoted Rabbi Bar Chana, who said that. He said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and also Ula used that to come up with his measurement of 15 mil being the distance that a person has to be from Yerushalayim to be parted from bringing the carbon, because he said that that's half the day's travel, which is half of 30 mil. And he got that 30 mil number by subtracting 5 mil from dawn to sunrise and 5 mil from sunset to Tzeitzah Kochavim. So all those three, Rabba, Rabbi Yochanan, and Ula, seem to be working with the assumption that the period from first light to sunrise is 5 mil. Here, Rabbi Yehuda says it's 4 mil. So the Gemara says this is definitely a kasha on Rava, who's working with that assumption. It's definitely a kasha on Ula, who's working with that assumption. It's certainly a kasha on Rabbi Bar Chana, who said that. The question is it a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan? How much did Rabbi Yochanan actually say? Did he say just the number of the 40 mil is the time from first light to last light, or did he also specify that it's 5 mil from first light to sunrise and 5 mil from sunset to disappearance of the light? So the Gemara says no, Rabbi Yochanan didn't spell that out. That was added later. He's not the one who said that. The Gemara says now hold on a second. This might also be a kasha on Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina said that when light was rushed from Sodom to Tzoyar, the amount of time that it took was from first light until the sun rose, because the Pesukim clearly say that the Malachim rushed him out when the first light began to appear, and he arrived in the Tzoyar as the sun rose upon the ground. And Rabbi Chanina said, I saw that was 5 mil. So Rabbi Yehuda says, though, that that's 4 mil. So how does that work? So the Gemara says it's not really a kasha, because they were rushing him. So it could be he traversed the 5 mil space. Rabbi Chanina testified that the distance there was 5 mil, could be it really was, but he traversed it in the time of only 4 mil, which is how long it takes the sun to travel, and that's not a kasha necessarily because he was being rushed. Okay, the Gemara now has more kashas on Rava. Rava had said that the length from horizon to horizon that the sun has to traverse is 6,000 parsais. The Gemara says it has to be much more than that. And our first proof is from a brayso that says Mitzrayim is 400 amos by 400 amos, which is 1/60th of Cush. Cush is 1/60th of the size of the world. The world is 1/60th of the size of the Gan. The Gan is 1/60th of the size of Aden. Aden is 1/60th the size of Gehenim, and it comes out that the world is like a tiny pot cover relative to the pot which is Gehenim. But what we see from here is that Mitzrayim, as 400 parsa long, is 1/60th of Cush, which is already much longer than 6,000 parsa, and therefore the world itself, which is 60 times longer than that, is significantly longer than Rava says, which is 6,000 parsa. That's a kasha on Rava. Next, the Gemara has another kasha from Matana de Be'elio, quotes Rabbi Nassan, that says that the entire settled, inhabited region of the world all fits under one star. How do you know? Because no matter where you go in the settled area of the world, you will see the same stars directly overhead wherever you are. So obviously the size of that star is greater than the settled area of the world, and the settled area of the world is definitely at least 1,000 parsa. Rashi fills that in. It's at least 1,000 parsa. We could see by traveling ourselves that it's at least 1,000. And there are many, many stars in the heaven from horizon to horizon. So obviously the distance from horizon to horizon is significantly more than 6,000 parsa. Each star is greater than 1,000 parsa because it's bigger than the settled world, and there are many more than 6 stars in the heaven itself. Another kasha on Rava. Next kasha, the Gemara says, the constellation of Taurus is always in the north. The constellation, this is quoting a brisa, the constellation of Taurus is always in the north. Constellation of Scorpio is always in the south. The entire inhabited area of the world is between the two, meaning you'll always see them tilted southward. You'll always be viewing them at an angle southward or northward, never directly overhead. And the sun, says the Brisa further, when it passes over the inhabited part of the world, it takes it only 1 hour. Out of its entire trip from horizon to horizon, only the middle hour, from half an hour before Chatzos to half an hour after Chatzos, is it directly overhead. That's where all people on the universe in its inhabited area only find it directly overhead in that hour. It takes only 1 hour to traverse the entire inhabited part of the world. Now, that means that the uninhabited part of the world is 11 times longer than the inhabited part of the world, because it takes 12 hours to get from horizon to horizon, and it's only 1 hour over the inhabited part of the world. And again, since the inhabited part of the world is at least 1,000 parsa, the entire world must be at least 12,000 parsa, and it cannot be 6,000 like Rava seems to say. Okay, next kasha. The Gemara says, we'll quote Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, who says that when Nebuchadnezzar said, Elel b'masi of Adam le'elyon, he said, I'm going to be like Hashem, like the Creator himself. So a voice came out of Shemaim and answered him, and it said, you're a Rasha, your father was a Rasha, your ancestor Nimrod was a Rasha. He thought he was going to conquer Shemaim with his tower that he built in the times of the Dar HaFlaga. You're just like him. And you're both foolish, because a man can only live 7 years, maybe 80 years, like the pasuk says. But how long does it take to get up to Shemayim? So it's as follows: the Rakia, the firmament, the heavens themselves, are 500 years travel from the earth. The thickness of the Rakia themselves are 500 years travel thick. Between each layer of Rakia is another 500 years travel, and therefore you're not going to get up to the top of the 7th Rakia, not in the 70 and 80 years you have on this planet, by no means. Now, even if you were just to walk straight up, you still wouldn't be able to do that. Now, the Gemara says, it has to be that the earth is as wide as the distance from earth to the Rakia. Everything is as wide as it is high. And therefore, it cannot be that it's only 6,000 parsas wide, because that is far less than 500 years travel at a rate of 10 parsas per day, which is what we said is the travel time that a person has each day. Okay, this ends the Gemara's proofs against Rava. Now the Gemara goes into a series of other astrological, astronomical discussions. And here we have a couple of comparisons of what Chachmei Yisrael say to what Chachmei Umas Ha'olam say. So the first is, when the stars move through the heavens, how do they move precisely? The Gemara views it as if there is a shell that is fixed over the earth. Again, we're using, not necessarily that we actually are assuming this, but we're using, because of how it appears, we use this as a mashal, as if Earth was flat, and you have a shell that's above Earth, and the stars are in the shell, and that shell is revolving. So the question is, what is happening? Is the shell revolving and the stars are stuck to the shell, and as the shell revolves, they move, or is each star moving independently? So the Gemara says, the Chachmei Yisrael, the wise men of Yisrael, said that the stars move independently, because you see that the stars don't all move the same. For example, Taurus and Scorpio are always in the north and the south, but other stars move a small amount. Taurus and Scorpio never move fully through the sky, and other stars only seem to move a small amount. When the sun passes through their area, they move a little bit around where the sun is meant to be. They have a small loop around the sun, but they don't take a big trip across the sky. So obviously, they're not fixed in the sphere, in the shell. The shell is, it could be fixed and not moving at all, or it could be revolving, but the stars move independently of that. Now the Chachmei Umas Olam say that no, that's not how it is. They're fixed in the sky, they're fixed in the shell, and the shell revolves and it rotates all at once. So the Gemara says, well, then we are obviously right and they are wrong, because if you look up, you see some constellations never move from the north and the south, and the stars only seem to move a small amount. So the Gemara says not necessarily. It could be that they are fixed to the shell, and the shell is moving, but the shell isn't moving smoothly directly across the earth like we see. The shell is spinning on an axis of some sort, and that axis might be in the sky over our heads, and that's why some stars only move a little bit. The Gemara says it's like when you have a metal rod that's lying in a large cup. So one end of the rod is on the floor of the cup, let's say in the center. The other end is on the rim of the cup. So when you spin it, so the center of the rod, the bottom of it, the part that's on the floor, doesn't move too much. It could even be fixed, and the rod spins around it. And the ends of the rod move in a very big circle around it. That's how the stars could work. It could be that the stars that are near the axis of rotation spin in a very small loop, and the other ones spin in a very large loop. As far as why some constellations move and some constellations do not move, it could be like the hinge of a door. A hinge of a door, if the door is fixed to the door frame, you could either move the door and hold the frame, or hold the frame and move the door. But either way, there is a hinge there that spins. So it could be that you have some stars which move independently of other constellations. That could be because there's more than one shell. There's more than one thing that's moving up there. The sun could be stuck to one, and therefore it moves in a certain speed and it moves through the stars. And other ones could move independently. There are planets which move independently of the other stars that we do see, but the stars all move in concert with each other. Okay, the Gemara goes on to another discussion between Chachmei Umas Olam and Chachmei Yisrael, and that is what happens to the sun when it sets at night. Does it go over the shell of the sky back to the beginning, you just don't see it because the shell of the sky is opaque, or does it go under the earth? So the Gemara says that the Chachmei Yisrael says that it goes over the sky, and Chachmei Umas Olam say that it goes under the earth. And the Gemara says that it appears that they are correct because the springs in the ground, the fresh water springs are flowing out of the ground, at night they get hot. And that must be because the sun is passing under the earth and it is heating them. Rashi says when you look at the rivers in the morning, you see steam rising off the rivers. That is a sign that they're hot. They must have been heated at night. They are much hotter at night than they are during the day. The Gemara now quotes a brisa which speaks about the different routes that the sun takes during different seasons. Rabbi Nassan says during the summer the sun passes high in the sky and therefore everything is hot, and the springs that are underground, those are cold. During the winter, however, the sun travels around the edges of the earth and therefore its light is hitting everything at an angle, therefore everything is cold and the springs themselves end up being hotter during the winter. Says Gemara, another brisa, there are 4 paths that the sun takes in the sky based on the 4 seasons. During the months of Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, it takes the path through the mountains. That's in order to thaw all the snow that's on the mountains. During Tammuz, Av, and Elul, it passes through the inhabited part of the world, and that's to help the fruits ripen. During Tishrei, Cheshvan, and Kislev, it travels through the seas area, and that's in order to dry the rivers. Tevis, Shvat, and Adar, it passes through the Midbar, the wilderness, and that's in order to avoid drying out the seeds that have just been planted. Okay, that's all the Gemara has to say about astronomy for now. The Gemara now goes back to a discussion about how far is too far to bring the carbon Pesach. We had seen the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer is that if you're just outside the Beis HaMikdash, that's too far. You don't have to come inside. We say you're outside the Azara, that's okay. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Why don't you just say to the guy, come inside? You're right here, come inside. What's preventing you? So the Gemara says he doesn't have to. If he's outside, that's called too far. He's not chayav, he's fine. Says the Gemara, but how is that different than somebody who doesn't have a bris milah, where we say to him, go get a bris milah? You don't have an excuse, you don't have a bris, and therefore you're an aral and you can't bring the carbon Pesach. That's not true. You have to go get the bris. So how come here we don't say he should come inside? Mar says it's different because derech rechoka is a patur. The Torah says somebody who's in derech rechoka does not have to fix it. He's okay. He's derech rechoka. He has a patur. He doesn't have to bring the carbon Pesach. That does not apply to other types of psulim like Tumah and Mila, where he does have to go take care of the issue if he can. Now, the Gemara says another answer is that this is actually a Tana that argues on Rabbi Eliezer. And we're going to show you that there's a machlokas on the subject as to how far away is called too far. And this Tana holds that if you're within Yerushalayim, you do have to come into the Beis Hamikdash. Where do you see that? So the Gemara Rava brings a brisa. The brisa says, how far is too far? We learn Richuk Makom that's said by Korban Pesach from the halacha of Richuk Makom that's said by Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni has to be brought to Yerushalayim and eaten in Yerushalayim. So the place is supposed to be brought, and the place that you're supposed to eat it is both in Yerushalayim. The Torah says that somebody who's Berichuk Makam is too far can change the kedusha from Meiser Sheni fruits onto money and bring that in. So how far is too far? So there the halacha is if you're outside Yerushalayim, you're too far. Now, that is two things. You're outside the place in which you're supposed to eat the Meiser. You're also outside the place in which you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to bring the Meiser. Korban Pesach is different. There, the place of eating is the whole Yerushalayim. The place of doing is the Azara. So what do we learn? We learn the definition of too far from Meiser, but what do we learn? We learn that it's right outside the place of eating or right outside the place of doing. Meiser is both. If you're outside Yerushalayim, you're both outside the place of eating and the place of doing, the place where you're supposed to bring it. Korban Pesach, do we say too far is outside the place of eating, and therefore you have to be outside Yerushalayim to be too far? Or do we say that it's outside the Azara because that's outside the place of doing, and that's what we learn from Meiser Sheni? So the Gemara says that's the machlokas. Machlokas is too far outside the Azara or too far outside Yerushalayim. And therefore you'll find the brisa which argues on Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says outside the Azara is too far, we don't have to tell him to come in, but the brisa about the bris milah, it says the guy has to go get a bris milah, that would say as long as you're within Yerushalayim, you do have to come inside. Says the Gemara, who's the author of the brisa that says the following statement, which was quoted by Rabbi Yitzchak by Rav Yosef, that says that when you want to decide if you have Rov Tmeim or Rov Tahirim, you count the people that are in the Azara itself. The people that are in the Azara are the people who count. Those are the ones who are relevant. Anybody else is too far, they're not even chayiv. Somebody's Barichuk Makom is not a chayiv. They don't count towards the calculations of whether we have Rov Tmeim or Rov Tahirim. You only count the people in the Azara. So who said that? That obviously is going like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that if you're outside the Azara, you're too far, you don't count at all. Okay, now back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that Rabbi Yasi commented on Rabbi Eliezer Shita and says this is why B'derech L'Rechoika has a dot over the hay to minimize it, that you don't have to be too far, you just have to be outside the Azara. The Gemara brings a brisa quoting Rabbi Yitzchak Lili that says you may think that to be too far has to be at least 2 or 3 days travel, but when the Torah says v'derech lehoya, when it says that you have to bring it unless you're b'derech, and if you're b'derech lehoya, if you're not considered to be b'derech, you do have to bring it. That means that anybody who's on the derech, anybody who's in any way called on the derech is pater. That would imply even if you're just outside the Azara, just like Rabbi Eliezer.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.